Carl, how fare immortal empires? Is Thrones of Decay enough for you to earn Creative Assembly redemption?
Redemption? Let me tell you this, vampire. A great man once said, redemption is between you and a priest. Though I think in Creative Assembly's case, they just avoided a priest armed with a warhammer hitting them at terminal velocity.
Some people just want to see the world burn, I suppose. It doesn't matter what good they do. They will never satisfy the likes of you.
Satisfaction. Do you know how long we have begged them to fix these issues? Do you know how many years of misery we have endured to even get this far? One good does not wash away the utter humiliation we have been through. It will require more, a lot more, to regain our trust.
I hate to say this, but this elf has a point. One good point and nothing more. They have wiped away a few dozen grudges, but it has been 8 years of insults for every true Dawi. For every day, nay, for every hour, we have added a grudge, and the great book remains full.
Expect nothing more from a dwarf, especially the short clown that hovers around the arse of his betters.
And after all of that, Luther Harkon was never seen from again. It is said that Grombrindal's ghost still haunts him in Lustria. But yes, I think that intro really makes my point over here, really. Creative Assembly has done a great job with respect to Thrones of Decay. Because if we look at Thrones of Decay, what we see from Creative Assembly, we see what happens when they care, when they do a good job, when they put enough people to work on it. Not necessarily enough time, because people will say, oh, it took longer to release Thrones of Decay than Shadows of Change. It did, but one shouldn't ignore the mess that's been happening in Creative Assembly over the last couple of months. I think the decision to rework the races and add as much content as they did in Thrones of Decay was made in December, when Creative Assembly released that message. Interesting note about that message, I was contacted by a former developer from CA who worked on Pharaoh and other things, and he told me, I had interviewed him, he told me, with respect to that message, that we had won. It certainly didn't feel like that at the time, but it basically meant that CA had decided to make a shift in terms of the products they were going to release, how they were going to release them, all of that. And look, Thrones of Decay is by far and away one of the best DLCs that Creative Assembly has ever released. Whether or not people consider it better than Potion of Speed, that's a discussion. But it's effectively the Potion of Speed of Warhammer 3. Range changes, racial reworks, new units, campaign changes. Not only did we get 4 new campaigns, because if we add Epidemius, and while not all of them are the best in the world, I think Tamarkan, yeah, Nurgle is not the best, but Tamarkan's a lot of fun. Malachi is probably the best campaign in the game by far at the moment. Really great design over there, great units, great lore. It's like the Gotrek and Felix adventure is personified over there. So really a huge amount of stuff over there to really enjoy. And then the major changes that Karl Franz and Balthazar Gelt have gotten to their campaigns. Like Gelt feels like the Supreme Patriarch, and Teclis is crying right there in a corner in the Fortress of Dawn. And Karl Franz now does feel like the Emperor of the Empire, one of the strongest nations in the world. So one shouldn't look at this video as trying to take away from that. I'm not. They've done a great job. But is it enough to redeem Creative Assembly? No. It's a start. And if they keep doing this, a couple of DLCs down the line, they might remove themselves from the Great Book of Grudges. But until that point, hopefully they will keep delivering on quality content. Hopefully they will eventually redo Kislev in the same way they redid the Empire. Hopefully they add new additions to X number of races. All of those things are necessary. And, siege improvements, if we could get another siege rework, because the one in Warhammer 3 just at launch wasn't that great. I think actually in general, the people designing Warhammer 3 didn't do a great job. And in fact, I think that a big reason why we're in this situation as it is Warhammer 3 failed for Creative Assembly. Like, they didn't want to release Immortal Empires as quickly as they did. They had to rush it. They sold a lot of copies. Not necessarily as much as Free Kingdoms, but they still sold a lot of copies. Like, when you consider the situation with the races released at the launch of Warhammer 3, that virtually all of them were quite terrible. Daniel's been forgotten, Kislev is in a terrible place, the demons are not in a great place, and the fact that we literally needed a rework for one of them, and hell, we need a rework for all of them, one way or another. Cafe less so. And then you release Shadows of Change, yeah, it's a disaster. Now, my feeling on the subject matter is a decision was made in Creative Assembly. You can talk about Rob Bartholomew, but I think it's management in general, people at the top. And even Sega, because Sega gave them a lot of freedom to do things as they wanted. I think one of the misconceptions that exists with this is like, oh, it's the big, bad corporate overlords in Sega that are responsible. Just like when people blame EA for BioWare or Westwood or Ubisoft. I mean, Ubisoft is very responsible for the things they've done. Let's be clear on that. But for the most part, it's like when I've seen with what I've seen with Westwood, what I've seen with BioWare, and based on all I know about Creative Assembly, it was the people inside Creative Assembly that were making these choices, and they had the freedom to do it. And based on what Legend of Total War has said, as well as others, Sega is not happy with them at all. Because I think it was like with Free Kingdoms, based on what I know, that they decided, okay, we're going to make something like Hyenas, or maybe before that even, we're going to make something like Hyenas. We're not going to spend as much effort in Total War, because Free Kingdoms DLC didn't sell as well as we wanted to. They apparently also had issues with the Chinese market. That's something I've personally heard from a former CAD developer. So issues with that, and so they decided to go in a different direction. And they wanted to go down the PUBG, Apex Legends, Fortnite route. Especially Fortnite, if you look at Hyenas. It was not a horrible game. I played it. I played it in the beta of it. It wasn't horrible, but damn, that was a disaster of colossal proportions. But I'm just explaining, I'm not justifying what Creative Assembly did, because for me, it was like running towards the edge of a cliff. And I made this point very clearly, that it was not going to be good, what they were going to do. Like, if they didn't rework Kislev and Siege and all that, it was going to be freaking horrible. Guess what? It was freaking horrible. And with Thrones of Decay, it was basically, they avoided execution. Because you gotta understand, the disaster that Creative Assembly has presided over is genuinely one of the biggest disasters in all of gaming history. Do you know what disaster is bigger? Because I've looked at the numbers. The only bigger disaster I could find was E.T. by Atari. Because Creative Assembly didn't just sink $100 million down the sink with that. They didn't even release the game, so they didn't make any of the money back, which is something that you can't even say about EA. I gotta say I appreciate the fact that Sega pulled the plug, because a company like Electronic Arts or Ubisoft would have released the game in a shitty state, right? And then killed it post-launch. And hell, company like Ubisoft or EA certainly would have just ignored Warhammer 3, moved on, because they've done that before, like, Mass Effect, Andromeda, all that, like, even Inquisition, Dragon Age Inquisition, they didn't necessarily give it the post-launch support it needed. That's just Electronic Arts. That's where you can blame the big bad corporation. I gotta say, I appreciate, like, the fact that Sega is like, enough of this bullshit, move back to your core audience, and they did fire a lot of people, and yeah, that's sad, but they screwed up. Creative Assembly screwed up. And when I compare it to E.T. and Atari, understand, E.T. 32 years ago lost them $600 million. That's the biggest disaster in gaming history. Well, okay, Atari lost in 1 year $600 million. It was a combination of things, but E.T. itself lost $100 million alone. So that was how bad. And at least it sold some copies, so it could have been worse. Hyenas lost them $100 million or $150 million, depends on the figure. Like, the estimate is over $100 million at any rate. But it's not just Hyenas. It's how they pissed off the Total War community, the reduced sales for DLC for Warhammer 3 in general. Because, like, you look at the sales, like, Castor sold well. Warriors, Champions of Cast did not. Shadows of Change is one of the worst selling DLCs in their history for the Warhammer games. Like, you look, like, people made the chart, like, player numbers for every DLC release, every game release, and, like, Total War Pharaoh and Shadows of Change are the worst period for Total War fantasy and historical games. Like, Thrones of Britannia was bought by more people than Pharaoh. People bought the Three Kingdoms DLC more than they bought Shadows of Change. That's how bad that DLC was. And that's simply the case. So you have that disaster, and you can honestly say without a doubt that Creative Assembly likely didn't just lose $100 million. They lost $200 million, if not more, because lost sales on Pharaoh and Shadows of Change, lost sales on Warhammer in general, lost sales on historical games, lost sales on games they could have made in the process. You know, if we add the potential they could have made, you know, if they had made another Total War, historical Total War, not Pharaoh, if they had made another game instead of dumping 100 million, if you add that, they're probably 300 million at the very least in lost opportunities in total, and 200 million certainly they lost money-wise. They probably didn't spend 100 million on Pharaoh and SOC, but you get the idea. So that is a biblical disaster, one of the biggest in gaming history. So, you know, people say it's sad that people were fired from Creative Assembly. I think people in Creative Assembly should be thankful. They should thank God that there's even a company anymore. I mean, like Sega could have pulled the plug. One of the things to mention about like Electronic Arts, for instance, like, do you know how Electronic Arts pulled the plug on Westwood? Just to give that example, because people say, oh, EA killed Westwood. No, Westwood killed Westwood. Did you know that Westwood made an MMO and it flopped really hard? You probably don't even know that it is. Like, the Command & Conquer games did well, but they were trying to do an MMO. It failed. After that failure is when EA shut down Westwood. Like, yeah, that's the disaster Westwood presided. As for BioWare, like, honestly, Anthem, like, beyond Andromeda, it was really Anthem. So lots of problems, lots of the bad decisions. And look, if they keep going down the road that they're on right now, if they keep doing the things in a similar vein to Thrones of Decay, if they keep improving the game, like Warhammer 3 is already the best Total War game. It has a lot of problems, undeniably so, but like I've tried playing other games and in the series, like, yeah, there's benefits in like Warhammer 1 and 2 and all that, but I gotta say, like, Warhammer 3 is the best game in the series for all the issues that it does have. It has the best campaign gameplay, it has the greatest variety. It's like the recipe of a game in a generation. And it's like they've been screwing us over on this game. They could have done a much better job. Hopefully they have now learned their lesson. And hopefully Sega has decided to stop screwing around and do things in a different way. And, you know, and I think like leadership in Creative Assembly has decided to do things in a different way. What I was told, like one of the things to mention about Rich Aldrich, who made that blog post late last year, what I've been told directly is that he's basically the guy that, like when there's an argument or a discussion in the company, he's basically kind of like the quiet guy who, you know, speaks up when a decision is made to be made. That's what I've understood. Could be wrong. All that I could be misrepresenting it. So I am mentioning it that particular aspect. But it did seem even at the time that CA had decided to go down a different path. Hopefully they do continue going down that path. And if they do, we're going to get more quality releases. We're going to get better games. Warhammer 3 is going to be vastly improved. Now, what do I think they need to do for during Warhammer 3? Racial reworks for things like Vampire Coast, Ogres, Norska, yes, Norska. Another Siege rework. I'm sure this discussion has happened once, at least in Creative Assembly, like, oh, we need to rework this race, or we need to rework this mechanic because it's not really that good. Well, we already reworked Sieges when Warhammer 3 launched. You want us to do this again? It's like, yeah, because it was badly handled. I'm sure the pandemic played a role in that. We shouldn't ignore that. And there's also the factor that you have to consider about like the IT industry in general, not just the gaming industry, where during the pandemic, for all the problems the pandemic caused them, they recorded record profits. And though then obviously the pandemic quote unquote ended, it hasn't, by the way, but the pandemic quote unquote ended, and obviously the situation has changed. So they're not seeing the profits. That's kind of like what led to all of this. So we'll see what's going to happen going forward. Regarding Total War Pharaoh and what they're doing with that Mesopotamia, honestly, I don't care about Mesopotamia. I know like this, there's certainly people say, oh, it would be cool to have Mesopotamia. Yeah, it would be cool if Total War Pharaoh had good battles, I would argue personally. That's what I think. Like, as long as the battle mechanics are awful, as long as the battle balance remains awful, and just adding Troy in historical mode in Pharaoh is not going to fix a thing. And in fact, I dare say Troy is actually the better game than Pharaoh. So it's like, you're going to give us the shitty mechanics in Pharaoh with the Trojan faction? That's not going to be fun, I'm going to tell you. Let alone, like, the battle mechanics of Pharaoh. So changes that need to be made there, like, just the battles feel pretty awful. Like, you know, infantry is certainly one of the weakest parts of Total War, so they need to do an overhaul. They could improve it. You know, if they've given the Sofia team the resources needed to do so, they could do a good job. Like, I think the Sofia team has a lot of potential. I think they've shown that. They've certainly had great ideas, like a lot of the great things about that have been implemented, like Warhammer III, like the Castorf economy and so on, came from the CA Sofia team. The warband upgrade system, CA Sofia, etc., etc. So if they got the budget and if they got the time and, yeah, if they were willing to change the battles and just the way they're doing campaign balancing and all that, it could be great. I wish CA would stop just copying mods, because, like, I get the impression they're copying a lot of SFO ideas for, like, especially the CA Sofia team. And SFO has its pros and cons, but it's like just copying pasting mods is not going to work very well. Just going to make that point. Anyway, that's all I had to say on the subject. Like, make no mistake on this, I'm very happy. Things are moving in the right direction. I, like many other content creators, I have suffered a lot over the last couple of months. And it's not just because of the issue of Total War. It's also other games being delayed, Homeworld 3, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it hasn't been a great period for me. But hopefully things are finally moving in the right direction, because, you know, I'm very critical of CA. And contrary to what some people might believe, content creators, like, there are some content creators that might want to play nice with gaming companies, but our main interest is to get videos that get as many views as possible and get an audience. That's our main principal interest. So we're not going to do that if the games that we're trying to cover are not well liked. And I also find it ridiculous when people blame, like, content creators for, like, the failure of SOC. It wasn't content creators that killed SOC. CA screwed up with SOC. And it's like, that's on them, really. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications.